commander of the Imperial Guard, walked through the ship's corridor with heavy steps. His gray scales reflected the cold light above. His 4 eyes scanned every corner because that was his training. That was his nature. There were predators. They had hunted across 1,000 worlds. Their claws had ended countless enemies. Their teeth had torn through armor and flesh alike. But today was not hunting. Today he was babysitting. The 3 cubs running ahead of him belonged to General himself. The general had important meetings with the council. His mate was on a diplomatic mission to the outer colonies, so the cubs were handed to the great commander, the killer of the rebellion, the breaker of the Void Fleet. Now he was chasing 3 small, who could not stay still for a single moment. "Slow down," growled. His voice was like thunder, but the cubs ignored him. They always ignored him. They feared nothing. They were children of a general. They thought the universe was their playground. The ship they were on was called the Eternal Fang. It was a massive warship that could destroy entire planets. But right now, it also carried something unusual, something that made many soldiers uncomfortable. A human. Her name was Sarah. She was what humans called an ambassador. The council had agreed to let her stay on the ship for 1 cycle. It was part of a new peace agreement between the Empire and the Human Federation. Nobody was happy about it. They did not trust humans. Humans were strange creatures. They were soft. They had no claws, no scales, no natural weapons at all. Yet somehow, they had fought to a standstill in the border wars. That made no sense to. He had studied humans. They were weak. Their bodies broke easily. They could not survive in extreme heat or cold. They needed to eat and drink constantly. They slept for almost 1/3 of their lives. How could such creatures stand against the? It was a mystery, and did not like mysteries. Sarah had been given quarters on the lower deck. It was far from the command center, far from anything important. The council wanted her close enough to study but far enough to ignore. Had seen her twice. Both times she had smiled at him. It was a strange expression, did not smile. They showed their teeth only when they were about to kill, but humans smiled all the time. It was confusing. The cubs turned a corner and disappeared from sight. Cursed under his breath and moved faster. His armored feet clanged against the metal floor. When he turned the same corner, he stopped. The cubs were standing in front of an open door. It was Sarah's door. "No," said, "come back here now." But the cubs were already inside. Rushed forward. His hearts beat faster. If something happened to the general's children near the human, it would cause problems. Big problems, war-level problems. He entered the room and looked around quickly. Sarah was not there. The room was empty except for human belongings. There was a small bed, some strange devices, clothing that looked too thin to provide any protection, and the cubs were gathered around a small container on a table. "What is that?" the oldest cub asked. His name was. He was 7 cycles old but already showed the sharp instincts of a hunter. His eyes were fixed on the container with intense curiosity. "Do not touch anything," commanded. "We are leaving." But it was too late. The youngest cub had already opened the container. Inside were dozens of small tubes, powders, and colored sticks. They shone in the light like tiny treasures. "Look," said, her voice was full of wonder, "colors." Moved closer. He looked at the strange items. He had no idea what they were. Some kind of chemical weapons, paint for marking territory. Human technology was always strange. Picked up a small black stick. He turned it in his claws, examining it carefully. "Put it down," said. Ignored him. He pulled off the cap and saw a dark point inside, like a weapon tip, like a marking tool. "It writes," said. He pressed it against his own arm and drew a line. A black line appeared on his gray scales. The other cubs gasped. "War paint," the middle cub whispered. His name was. He was quieter than his siblings but always thinking. "This is war paint, like the old warriors used." Felt his stomach drop. War paint was sacred to the. In ancient times, before they had spaceships and plasma weapons, warriors would paint their faces and bodies before battle. Each color had meaning. Each pattern told a story. Black was for death. Red was for blood and victory. White was for the ancestors watching from beyond. The tradition had died out centuries ago. Modern thought it was primitive, silly, something from a less civilized time. But children remembered. Children always remembered the old stories. "This is not war paint," said. "This is human, something, put it back." Grabbed a red tube. She opened it and found a soft red stick inside. It smelled strange, sweet, like nothing on any world. "Red," she said, "for victory." She drew a line under her left eye. Reached for her but stepped in front. "Let us try," said. His young eyes were challenging. "It is just paint. What harm can it cause?" Should have grabbed them all and dragged them out. He should have called for guards. He should have done many things. But he hesitated. These were the general's children. If he hurt them or upset them, there would be consequences. And they were just playing with colors. What was the danger in that? "Fine," he said through his teeth, "but be quick and do not make a mess." The cubs cheered. They dove into the container like hunters finding prey. Each one grabbed different items, took all the red things she could find, took black and dark purple, was more careful, studying each item before choosing. Watched them with growing unease. Smeared red across her cheeks and forehead. She made patterns that looked like flames, like the burning worlds in old war songs. Drew black lines around all four of his eyes. He made his face look like a skull, like death itself coming to claim enemies. Found a golden powder. He used his claw to spread it across his scales. It made him shine like a sun god, like the ancient emperors who had conquered the first. They did not look like cubs anymore. They looked like warriors from legend. Felt a chill run down his spine. The feeling was wrong. These were children. This was just play. But seeing them painted in the old ways stirred something deep inside him, something ancient, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "We need more," said. He was the leader now. His painted face gave him authority. "Give me the white." Handed him a small container of white powder. Humans called it foundation, but the cubs did not know that. To them, it was the color of ancestors, the color of those who watched from the spirit realm. Drew white circles on his shoulders, old symbols, marks of honor. "Where did you learn that pattern?" asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "Grandfather showed me," said. "In the history books. He said our family carried these marks in the First War, before we had ships, before we had anything but our claws and our courage." Said nothing. The cubs continued painting themselves. They helped each other reach difficult spots, painted a red spiral on's back, drew golden lines down's arms. They worked together like a hunting pack, like soldiers preparing for battle. When they were done, they stood in a line and faced. The commander stared at them. They were magnificent. They were terrifying. They were in a way that no modern was anymore. "We are ready for war," announced. "There is no war," said, but his voice was weak. "There is always war," replied. He smiled, showing his small but sharp teeth. "You taught us that." Had no response. The door behind them opened. All of them turned at once, instincts sharp, bodies ready. Sarah stood in the doorway. She was a small human, smaller than any adult. Her skin was soft and brown. Her hair was black and long, tied behind her head. She wore simple human clothing that provided no armor at all. She looked at the cubs. The cubs looked at her. Nobody moved. Sarah's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked at the painted faces, the colored scales, the war markings that covered the three small. Then she looked at the container on her table, at the tubes and powders scattered everywhere, at the mess of makeup that had been organized so carefully just hours ago. "Oh," she said. Waited for her to scream, to call for help, to accuse him of allowing children to steal her belongings. Humans were known for overreacting. This would be a diplomatic incident. The general would be furious, would be demoted, or worse. But Sarah did not scream. She did something much more strange. She laughed. It was a bright sound, warm, like nothing had ever heard from any species. It filled the small room and seemed to push away all the tension. "They found my makeup," Sarah said. She was still laughing. "They actually found my makeup." Did not understand. "Your what?" he asked. "Makeup," Sarah repeated. She walked into the room, completely unafraid of the giant armored commander and 3 painted predator cubs. "It is. How do I explain? It is what humans use to decorate their faces, for beauty, for fun, sometimes for special occasions." Stepped forward. His skull-painted face was serious. "This is war paint," he said, "for warriors, for battle." Sarah looked at him carefully. "In some human cultures, yes," she said. "Long ago our warriors painted themselves too, to scare enemies, to honor ancestors, to show they were not afraid to die." Nodded with approval. "But now," Sarah continued, "we use makeup for many things. Some humans wear it every day. It makes them feel confident. It helps them show who they are on the inside." "Every day?" asked. "You paint yourself every day?" "Many humans do, yes." The cubs exchanged looks. "Your species is braver than we thought," said quietly. Sarah smiled again. Finally found his voice. "Ambassador, I apologize for this invasion of your space. These cubs are under my supervision. I will accept full responsibility for any damage to your belongings." Sarah waved her hand. "No damage done," she said. "Honestly, this is the most interesting thing that has happened to me on this ship. Everyone else treats me like I might explode." She looked at the cubs again. "You know what? You did a really good job with those patterns, very fierce, very warrior-like." Stood taller. "Thank you, human," he said. Sarah walked to her container and looked through what remained. "Would you like to see how humans do it?" she asked. "The way our warriors used to paint, and the way we paint now." The cubs looked at Sarah. Every instinct in his body said to leave. This was wrong. This was strange. This was a human offering to teach children about their customs. It was not done. It was against all tradition. But the cubs were happy. And Sarah was not afraid. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was something important. "Fine," he said, "but I am watching." Sarah smiled at him. "Of course, Commander, I would expect nothing less." She gathered the cubs around her and began to show them the treasures of her makeup kit. The lipstick in 7 different shades. The eyeshadow palettes with colors they had never seen. The mascara and eyeliner and foundation and blush. The cubs listened, with the focus of students learning sacred texts. Watch from the corner, his arms crossed over his chest. He did not know it yet, but this moment would change everything. Not just for the cubs, not just for Sarah, but for both their species. Sarah opened her palette of eyeshadow and held it up for the cubs to see. The colors inside caught the light and sparkled like precious gems. Blues deeper than any ocean, greens like the forests of lost worlds, purples that seemed to hold mysteries inside them. Made a sound of pure wonder. "How many colors do humans have?" she asked. Sarah thought about it. "Thousands," she said. "Maybe millions if you count all the different shades. Humans are very creative about colors. We name them after things we love. Sunset orange, ocean blue, rose petal pink." "You name colors after things?" asked. He seemed fascinated by this idea. "We name everything," Sarah said with a small laugh. "Humans love naming things. It makes the universe feel more like home. Reached out and touched the purple eyeshadow. It left a shimmer on his claw. This one, he said. What is this called? Midnight purple, Sarah said, because it looks like the sky in the darkest part of night. Stared at his claw for a long moment. Midnight purple, he repeated. The words sounded strange in his rough voice, but he said them with respect. I like it. Watch from his corner, he said nothing, but his 4 eyes missed nothing. Sarah began teaching the cubs how humans applied makeup. She showed them how to use brushes instead of claws, how to blend colors together so they flowed into each other like water, how to create shadows and highlights that changed the shape of a face. Humans are very good at illusions, observed. We have to be, Sarah said. We are not the strongest species, we are not the fastest, we cannot breathe in space or swim in acid, so we learn to use our minds instead, to create, to imagine, to make things that do not exist. Weakness bred invention, said from his corner. Sarah looked at him. She was not offended. Yes, she agreed. Exactly that. Every human invention came from a problem we could not solve with our bodies. We could not run fast enough, so we built vehicles. We could not see far enough, so we built telescopes. We could not fight predators with our bare hands, so we built weapons. And the paint asked, what problem did it solve? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Loneliness, she finally said. Humans are social creatures. We need to belong. We need to be seen. We need to express what is inside us. Paint lets us do that. It lets us show the world who we are, or who we want to be. The cubs considered this. Do not think this way, said. We are what we are. We do not pretend. Maybe not pretend, Sarah said gently, but do you not have rituals, ceremonies, ways of showing honor or rank or achievement? We have many, said. Our scars show our battles. Our medals show our victories. Our names carry the weight of our ancestors. Then you understand, Sarah said. You just express it differently, that is all. Felt something shift in his chest. It was an uncomfortable feeling. The human was making sense. He did not want her to make sense. Sarah picked up the red lipstick that had used earlier. Do you want to see something? She asked the cubs. They all leaned forward. Sarah opened the lipstick and applied it to her own lips. The red was bright against her brown skin. It made her look different, bolder, more alive. This is how human females often wear it, she said. Red has been popular for thousands of years. In ancient times, only powerful women wore it. Queens, priestesses, warriors. You had female warriors, asked with surprise. Many, Sarah said. Humans do not separate by gender the same way some species do. Anyone can be a warrior. Anyone can be a leader. Anyone can be anything. Females fight too, said proudly. My mother led a fleet before she became a diplomat. Then she and I have something in common, Sarah said. Strong females in worlds that do not always understand them. Smiled, it was not a smile of teeth and threat. It was something softer, something she had learned just now. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Everyone froze. Moved to the door, his hand dropping to the plasma blade at his side. His instincts told him something was wrong. Multiple were approaching, soldiers by the sound of their steps, and they were moving fast. The door slid open before he could reach it. Captain stood in the doorway. Behind him were 6 members of the Imperial Guard. They were in full armor. Their weapons were drawn. Was one of the most decorated soldiers on the Eternal Fang. He had served in 17 campaigns. He had killed more enemies than most could count. His scales were covered with scars, each one a story of battle and blood. His 4 eyes swept the room. He saw Sarah. He saw the 3 cubs. And then he froze. It was not a small freeze, not a moment of pause or hesitation. Captain, the killer of thousands, the breaker of worlds, stopped moving completely. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened. His weapon dropped from his suddenly loose grip. The soldiers behind him had similar reactions. Some stepped back. Some made religious gestures. One actually fell to his knees. Did not understand. "Captain," he said, "what is the meaning of this?" Did not answer. He could not answer. His eyes were fixed on the cubs. On their painted faces. On the red flames on his cheeks. On the black skull around his eyes. On the golden shimmer across his scales. "The old ways," whispered. His voice was shaking. "The marks of the first warriors." One of the soldiers behind him spoke in a hushed tone. "It is a sign," he said. "It is a sign from the ancestors." Finally understood. The cubs did not look like children playing with colors. They looked like legends come to life. They looked like the warriors from ancient songs, the heroes who had united the people, the brave ones who had faced impossible odds and won. Modern had forgotten. They had advanced so far in technology that they left their history behind. War paint was something in museums, something in old videos, something that nobody living had ever actually seen on real scales. Until now. "These are the general's children," said carefully. "They found human supplies and were experimenting." "Human supplies," repeated. He finally noticed Sarah standing quietly by the table. His eyes narrowed. "The human gave them war paint." "Makeup," Sarah said. Her voice was calm but careful. "It is called makeup. Humans use it for decoration. The children found it and applied it themselves." "You lie," one of the soldiers said. "Humans cannot possess such sacred things." "It is not sacred to us," Sarah explained. "It is ordinary. Humans buy it in stores. We wear it to work, to celebrations, to everyday life. It has no special meaning beyond what we give it." The soldier looked horrified. "You treat war paint as ordinary?" he asked. "You wear the marks of warriors to work?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but stepped forward. Even painted as he was still just a 7-year-old cub. But his posture was that of a commander. His voice carried authority beyond his years. "The human told us the truth," said. "Makeup is her people's version of war paint. They wear it every day because they believe every day is a battle. Every day requires courage. Every day they must show the universe who they are." Silence filled the room. Stared at the cub. "Every day is a battle," he repeated slowly. "That is what she said," confirmed. "Humans are weak in body. They have no claws, no scales, no natural weapons. So they wake up each morning and put on their armor, their paint, their courage. They face a hostile universe with nothing but their will and their colors." Turned to Sarah. "Is this true, human?" Sarah met his gaze directly. She was half his size and had no weapons or armor, but she did not look away. "It is true," she said. "Humans have survived for millions of years on a dangerous planet. We were not the strongest predators. We were not the fastest prey. We survived because we refused to give up. Every day we choose to keep going. Every day we choose to face whatever comes. And yes, sometimes we put on lipstick or eyeshadow before we do it, because looking strong helps us feel strong, and feeling strong helps us be strong." The soldier who had fallen to his knees slowly stood up. "They wear courage on their faces," he said with wonder. "They carry their warrior spirit visible for all to see." "Not just warriors," added. He had been quiet until now, but his thoughtful eyes had been watching everything. "The human said scientists wear it, teachers, parents, everyone who must be brave." "Which is everyone," finished, "because being alive is brave." Stood completely still for a very long time. Watched him carefully. Was dangerous. He was old-fashioned. He believed in strict tradition and had little patience for anything new or foreign. If he decided this was an insult to culture, things could get very bad very quickly. But did not attack. He did not shout. He did not arrest anyone. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He knelt. His armored knee hit the floor with a heavy clang. His head bowed. Behind him, the other soldiers gasped, but then they followed their captain's lead. One by one, they knelt. For generations, said, we have called humans weak. We have mocked their soft bodies and their need for machines. We thought we were superior because we were born with weapons. He raised his head and looked at the cubs. But we were fools, he continued. The humans carry their weapons inside. Their courage is not given by birth. It is chosen, every single day. They paint themselves not because they must, but because they want the universe to know they will not surrender. He turned to Sarah. Human, he said, I have fought your people in battle. I have seen them die. I never understood why they kept fighting when they should have run. Now I understand. They could not run. Running is not in them. They paint their faces and march forward because that is who they are. Sarah did not know how to respond. I am just an ambassador, she said quietly. I am not a soldier. Stood up. Ambassador is a kind of soldier, he said. You came to this ship alone. You walked among predators who could kill you with a single claw. You smiled when we showed our teeth. You did not fear us. I feared you plenty, Sarah admitted. But you came anyway, said. That is what courage means. That is what the war paint represents, facing fear and moving forward. The soldiers behind stood up as well. They looked at Sarah differently now, not as a strange creature to be watched, not as a potential threat to be monitored. As something else. Something worthy of respect. Captain said carefully, what will you report to the general about this incident? Considered the question. I will report that I discovered the cubs exploring human cultural artifacts, he said. I will report that Ambassador showed them courtesy and education. I will recommend that the council study human customs more carefully. There may be wisdom we have overlooked. It was the most diplomatic thing had ever heard say. Thank you, Captain, Sarah said. Nodded to her. It was a formal gesture, a gesture of equality. Thank you, Ambassador, he replied, for teaching our children what we had forgotten. He turned and walked out. His soldiers followed. The room was quiet again. Let out a long breath. That was scary, she admitted. You were very brave, Sarah told her. All of you were. Looked at his painted hands. I want to learn more, he said, about human customs, about why you do the things you do. Me too, agreed. Me three, added. Sarah looked at. Commander, is that allowed? Had no idea if it was allowed. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this situation, but he had seen something today that changed him. He had seen fear in the eyes of the bravest soldiers on the ship, fear and wonder and something like hope. If 3 cubs with human makeup could do that, perhaps there was more to learn about humans than he had thought. I will ask the general, he said, but I believe he will approve. Sarah smiled. Then let me show you what else is in my kit, she said to the cubs. There is much more to human decoration than war paint. The cubs gathered around her again and watched. And somewhere deep in the ship, Captain was already writing a report that would reach the council within hours. A report about humans and their strange customs. A report about courage and color, and what it truly means to be a warrior. A report that would change the relationship between 2 species forever. But that story was still being written. For now, in a small room on the lower deck of the Eternal Fang, a human woman was teaching 3 predator cubs about mascara. And the universe was a little bit different because of it. 3 weeks passed after the incident in Sarah's quarters. The news spread through the Eternal Fang like fire through dry grass. Every soldier, every technician, every worker heard some version of the story. The general's cubs had found human war paint. Captain had knelt before children. The old ways had returned through the strangest possible source. Some thought it was nonsense. Some thought it was a miracle. General demanded a full report when he returned from his council meetings. He listened to describe everything in detail. He watched the security footage from Sarah's room. He studied the faces of his painted children like a scientist examining evidence. Then he asked to meet with Sarah. The meeting took place in the general's personal chamber. It was a large room filled with weapons from every campaign had fought. Blades and guns and shields from a dozen different worlds decorated the walls, trophies of a life spent in battle. Sarah sat in a chair that was too big for her human frame. Her feet did not quite touch the floor, but her back was straight and her eyes were steady. Sat across from her, he was massive even by standards. His scales were dark gray, almost black. His 4 eyes held the weight of decades of war and death. "My children speak of you constantly," he said. His voice was surprisingly soft for such a large creature. "They call you the color teacher." Sarah smiled slightly. "They gave themselves that name for me," she said. "I just showed them what I had." "You showed them much more than that," replied. "You showed them something about themselves, about our people, something we had lost." "I did not mean to cause trouble," Sarah said. "They were curious. I was happy to share. In human culture, teaching children is considered an honor." Nodded slowly. "In culture as well," he said. "Although we teach different things, combat, strategy, how to kill quickly and efficiently. Those are useful skills in a dangerous universe." "They are," agreed, "but perhaps not the only skills worth learning." He stood up and walked to one of the walls. There was a display case there that Sarah had not noticed before. Inside was not a weapon, it was a face. A mask. It was ancient, the materials were primitive, but the patterns painted on it were clear even after all these years. Black around the eyes, red on the cheeks, white on the forehead. "This belonged to my ancestor," said. "The first, the one who united 3 warring tribes and began the bloodline that would eventually lead to me." He touched the glass gently. "He wore this into his final battle, outnumbered 10-1, no hope of survival, but he painted his face, picked up his blade, and charged anyway. They say his enemies ran when they saw him, not because of his army, because of the look in his eyes, because they knew he was not afraid to die." Sarah listened silently. "He won that battle," continued, "against all odds, against all reason. He won because his enemies expected him to surrender. They expected fear. Instead, they got a warrior who had already made peace with death." He turned back to Sarah. "For centuries, war paint into battle. It reminded us that we were more than flesh and scale. We were history. We were honor. We were something worth fighting for." "What happened?" Sarah asked. "Why did you stop?" Returned to his seat. "Technology," he said. "We developed better weapons, better armor, better ships. The paint seemed unnecessary, old-fashioned. We forgot that it was never about the paint itself. It was about what the paint represented." "Courage," Sarah said. "Purpose," replied. "The paint told a story. It said, I know who I am, I know what I fight for, I am not ashamed of my ancestors or my cause." When we stopped painting, we stopped telling that story. We became soldiers instead of warriors. There is a difference." Sarah thought about his words. "On Earth," she said slowly, "we had similar traditions. Many cultures painted their faces for war. The Celts, the Vikings, native peoples from every continent. They all understood that battle is not just physical, it is mental, spiritual. The paint was armor for the soul." Leaned forward with interest. "And you still use this paint?" "In a different form," Sarah said. "Makeup evolved over thousands of years. It became fashion, beauty, self-expression. But underneath it is still the same thing, a way of putting on your brave face before facing the world. Even when there is no battle." "There is always a battle," Sarah said, "just not always with enemies. Sometimes the battle is with ourselves, with doubt, with fear, with the voice that says we are not good enough. Makeup does not win those battles, but it helps us show up ready to fight them. Was silent for a long moment. My wife thinks I am foolish, he finally said. She says I am reading too much into a children's game. What do you think? Sarah asked. Stood up again. He walked to his ancestor's mask and removed it from the case. He held it carefully in his large claws. I think my children discovered something important, he said. I think your people have something to teach mine, not about war. We know war too well, about why we fight, about what gives fighting meaning. He placed the mask on his own face. It was too small. It had been made of a different era, smaller and leaner than the modern warriors. But when wore it, something changed. He did not look silly. He looked ancient, powerful, connected to a chain of history stretching back beyond memory. General, Sarah said quietly, are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting? Remove the mask. I am suggesting a cultural exchange, he said. Real exchange, not diplomats and treaties. Your people come to our ships and teach us about your ways. Our people go to your worlds and share our traditions. We learn from each other. We grow from each other. The council would never approve. The council follows where I lead, said. I am not just a general. I am a symbol. If I say this is good for the many will believe me. And if they do not? Then we argue, we debate. We fight with words instead of weapons. That is what peace means, ambassador, not the absence of conflict, the transformation of it. Sarah considered his proposal. It was dangerous. There were countless ways it could go wrong, cultural misunderstandings, political complications, centuries of distrust between humans and... But it was also an opportunity. An opportunity that had started with 3 cubs and a makeup kit. I will need to contact my superiors, Sarah said. This decision is above my authority. Of course, agreed, but I wanted you to know my intentions first. You started this, color teacher. You should be part of what comes next. He called for. The commander entered immediately. He had been waiting outside the entire time. Commander said, escort ambassador back to her quarters, and from now on she is to be treated as an honored guest. Give her access to the common areas. Let her interact with the crew. If anyone objects, send them to me. Saluted. Yes, General. Sarah stood up from her oversized chair. Thank you, General, for listening, for considering. Nodded. Thank you, Ambassador, for reminding my children, and perhaps my entire species, that true strength comes not from claws or weapons. It comes from the courage to show who you are. Sarah walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. General, may I ask one more question? Of course. Your children, and will they be punished for what happened, for entering my room without permission? Made a sound that might have been a laugh. Punished? Ambassador, my children stumbled into a cultural revolution while looking for something to play with. When they are older, they will probably receive medals. Sarah smiled. Good, she said. They are remarkable children. They are, the general said with pride. We tend to find trouble wherever we go. Led Sarah out of the chamber and through the ship's corridors. They walked in silence for a while. Commander, Sarah finally said, you have been watching me for weeks. Do you still think humans are weak? Took a long time to answer. I think, he said carefully, that weakness and strength are more complicated than I understood. You have no claws, but you have something else. Something that makes soldiers kneel and generals change their minds. And what is that something? I do not know, admitted, but I think it has to do with how you see the universe. You do not see obstacles, you see challenges. You do not see enemies, you see potential allies. You do not see defeat, you see lessons. We see possibilities, Sarah said. That is the human way. We look at what is and imagine what could be. Then we work to make it real. Even when the odds are against you. Especially then, Sarah said. The best human stories are about people who succeeded when they should have failed. We love those stories. We tell them to our children. We carry them in our hearts when everything seems hopeless. They reached Sarah's quarters. Ambassador said, "I have a request." "Yes." "My niece is young, just 4 cycles old. She is curious about everything. She asks questions constantly." He paused. Would you teach her about colors, about human customs? I think she would enjoy it." Sarah's smile was warm and bright. "I would be honored, Commander. Bring her by any time." Nodded stiffly and walked away. Sarah entered her room and sat on her bed. She looked at the makeup kit on her table. It was messier than before. The cubs had not been gentle with it. Several items were nearly empty. Others were mixed together in ways that would never quite separate. But it had done something amazing. It had built a bridge. A bridge between species who had been enemies for generations. A bridge made of lipstick and eyeshadow and the universal desire to be seen, to be known, to be more than just flesh and bone. Sarah picked up the red lipstick that had loved so much. She looked at it for a moment. Then she applied it to her own lips. In the mirror across the room, she saw herself. A small human woman in the heart of an alien warship, surrounded by predators who could tear her apart without effort. But she was not afraid. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Doing exactly what she was meant to do. Building peace one color at a time. 6 months later, the first official human cultural exchange program was launched. Human artists visited ships to teach about makeup, painting, and visual expression. Warriors traveled to human worlds to demonstrate their ancient traditions and rituals. The program was controversial at first. Many on both sides thought it was foolish, a waste of time and resources. But the children loved it. Cubs learned to paint their faces with human makeup. Human children learned to wear traditional symbols. They shared stories. They shared dreams. They became friends in ways their parents never imagined. And slowly, very slowly, the universe changed. Wars still happened. Conflicts still arose. The galaxy was still a dangerous place full of threats and challenges. But there was one ship, the Eternal Fang, where humans worked side by side. Where a human ambassador taught makeup to predator cubs. Where a commander asked questions about colors and customs. Where a general wore his ancestors' mask and remembered what it meant to be a warrior. There was one ship where 2 species learned that they were not so different after all. And it all started with a makeup kit. Grew up to become a diplomat like his mother. He specialized in human relations. He always wore a touch of midnight purple around his eyes during important negotiations. He said it helped him remember to look for possibilities instead of problems. Became a historian. He wrote the definitive book on war paint traditions and their surprising connection to human cosmetics. The book was required reading in schools across both civilizations. Became a soldier like her father. She led the first mixed species unit in galactic history, humans and fighting together, painting their faces together before every battle, carrying each other's courage into the darkness. And Sarah became a legend. Not because she did anything heroic in the traditional sense. She never fired a weapon. She never led an army. She never conquered a world. She just shared her makeup kit with 3 curious cubs. And in doing so, she changed the course of history. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are not won with weapons. They are won with colors. With courage. With the simple, radical act of showing someone who you really are. And letting them show you the same in return. That is the human way. That is the story of how war paint brought peace. That is why, centuries later, both species still paint their faces before facing the unknown. Not because they have to. Because they want to. Because it reminds them of who they are. And who they can become. Together,